All right, it's 5 o'clock. If everybody's ready, we'll call the meeting to order. We'll start with the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, everybody, for attending tonight. We're going to have our public meeting notice has to be in the newspapers by February 5th, I believe. Is that correct, Jim?
That's correct.
So we got a little work to do, so we're going to see if we can fit in an extra couple meetings in the timeline that's available to us, so we can get something through to the planning board for the public meetings they can propose. And we could talk about that in a little bit. I just want to give you a fair warning on it. All right. Top of the order tonight on the agenda is proposed open space diverse housing development, OSDHD review and discussion. Jim, if you'd give us a rundown on this.
Sure. I sent out an email, kind of an original copy. I made some edits today, but mostly minor. So there's a this is based off a request from a developer who has a certain, product, which is kind of single-family housing, but it's when they do over 55, it's on one piece of land and not on individual lots. And so what they did was they took the townhouse bylaw and made some edits to it. And, in your packet, it's called Open Space Diverse Housing Development. I didn't really like that name, so I came up with the name Neighborhood Pocket Development Bylaw. But it would allow, on a single piece of land, and the size of the land varies based on the zoning district, that you could put single-family duplexes or like 3 to 5 units in the same building, but it's not fixed to that. So there's flexibility, so that you have a variety of housing within one development type. So I just wanted to bring that to the attention of the group, so that they wanted to take a look at that. It is based on the existing townhouse bylaw, which allows more than 2 but less than 5 housing units per building. So, but it's pretty much takes off from that. Doesn't change any of the density requirements or anything like that. So it's an opportunity to allow flexibility for developers who would like to use that. They would like to see single family, or they could be all single family, or it could be all duplex, or it could be a mix of duplex, threeplex, depending on how they want to go propose their development.
Now, if it was all single family, wouldn't it fall under subdivision rules?
No, because it would fall under this regulation. So you could do a single family proposal, and the setback, all the dimensional requirements are tied into this particular proposed bylaw. So instead of your standard, minimum 60,000 square foot lot, you'd have one lot, or it could be 2 lots in the same thing. But on that one lot, you could propose multiple housing units, but part of the proposal, there's building envelopes, so you have to have a building envelope. They have to be separated from other buildings on the property. There's a requirement for so much open space. So you kind of take away the individual lots, and then you kind of maneuver the houses so that they're, kind of optimal, for that particular neighborhood. To provide more open space, because, part of the,
And-
bylaw is requirement for open space.
And how does this differ from the conservation subdivision?
The conservation, you do end up with individual lots as part of it, so they're smaller, individual lots in which the houses are set, and then those houses are set back, using the dimensional guidelines under the open space subdivision.
Okay. And now,
And
this
so-
is to allow single-family housing to be used in mixed use with multifamily developments.
So you could have a development where, say maybe you have 5, cottage-style houses mixed in with some townhouses, which could be 2-family, side-by-side units, a 3-family. So you're not fixed to any one type. It really depends on what the current market is, and also what the needs of the community are. So it could be advantageous to have kind of a mix. You could have, maybe part of it, you have some older 55 elderly housing, but next door you have, some mixed housing, kind of on the same piece of land.
And by mixed housing, you mean different housing styles?
Right, so, they'll probably have the same architectural style, but there'd be different types of units. So
Right.
Single family, 2-family, or 3 families, or whatever the case may be.
Okay. I expect everybody had a chance to glance over the information Jim sent us in the mail.
So I have in the pile over there my edits that I did today. So what I sent out last week, just a little bit different. So I changed the name from Open Space Diverse Housing, which was the original title. And so I decided to call it Neighborhood Pocket Development.
Okay.
Less of a tongue twister to try to
Yeah.
speak about.
Aside from taking out townhouse in a few places, I think that's the only real major change I notice off the top of my head. So, should we open it for discussion? Personally, yes, please.
Yeah, I was just going to ask Jim, I know that in a regular subdivision, the new houses that we see that come before the planning board now, the new subdivisions, the houses are $600,000 to $700,000 for a new house. Because of this type of style of development, would this type of housing be less expensive and more affordable?
I want to say potentially, but sometimes you would hope that you get, I think you have to take a look at some of the, density. If you allow more housing, you could, maybe get more units at a lower cost. But, if we look at Santana Way, I think they're selling around the 430s, 440s, which are, I think those are duplexes and 3plexes, or 3 units in a row. They're 3-unit style townhouses. I don't know if anyone knows where they're at, but they're up off of Plymouth Street.
Yep.
And then the roadway kind of goes in, and so they've been working on that for the past year, getting those units built. Because I was looking at a project or a development down in town of Dennis. So I live down on the Cape. I was driving by one day and I saw this, very nice single-family houses going in, but they were on, they may not be on individual lots, but they're, if you look at kind of like a Charleston, South Carolina, just kind of row house style, single families. And I said, oh, this would be a good example. Then I looked at the real estate ad and it said about they're $600,000 to $700,000 each, and I said, okay, on the price point side, not a good example, but I think it seems to be kind of a type of development style that people are looking for, whether they're downsizing or upsizing, as the case may be.
All right. Did anybody else have any questions for Mr. Walsh? Yes, please.
Yeah, just, when you have one piece of land and you have one house on it, the owner controls everything. Now you throw 3 units on that house, so they considered condominiums?
So I think the basis for the whole thing would be like a homeowners association controls the one piece of land. And so, I'm not 100% sure of the logistics, but I think they're technically considered kind of condos. So the person buying the house or the structure would own the structure. One option could be that there's a homeowners association that controls the maintenance and care of the common property. It could be that but under this bylaw, you couldn't have individual lots. So, whereas under the open space subdivision, it appears that most of the lots that I've seen on those developments end up to be about 30,000 square feet.
So in many of these units, the people, they might get the unit at a little less price, but then they're looking at taxes plus homeowner fees and such, so it could come back to the same price. So Carver does Carver need this type of development right now?
That's kind of, we're hear from different people in the market.
Yeah.
So for example, there's an approved subdivision up on High Street, not Gilbert Estates, I forgot the name of the development.
Whistleberry Glen?
Whistleberry, which has been approved but hasn't been developed yet. And in the last year, had a couple of calls and said, well, would the town consider townhouses over there? And I said, well, I really don't know. I would have to talk to we would have to talk to the planning board to see, that was something that could be done. So, and then, haven't really followed recently with the Santana Way, so I'm not sure what the sales are like, but generally it seems like, the more units per acre can help draw down that land, take the land cost out of the cost of the property.
Right, yeah.
But we're still maintaining the base square footage required per dwelling at 60,000 square feet? In other words, the other land will be conservation land, or?
Well, so it has a requirement for open space. So part of the process is you have to, so you have a piece of property, you come in, you have to do what they refer to as the NULA, net usable land area. And so you have to take out all the wetlands, bogs, waterways, the 65-foot zone. And so then that results in your net usable area, so that's the uplands. And if you're in the RA zoning district and you're not doing over 55, so half of the uplands has to be open space, and then of course that's added to all the other stuff. So, say if you had a 10 acres net usable land, that would result in about 5 units on that parcel. Actually it's a little bit more, it's 12 units because there's a multiplier of 1.2. So
We can multiply it by 1.25.
Well, what it says in the bylaw is multiplied by 1.2.
It says shall not exceed 1.2.
I'm sorry?
I'm sorry, Mr. Chair. Sarah Hewens. It says it shall not exceed 1.2 units.
Yeah.
Okay, so you have 1.2, just to say you use 1.2, so that's,
1.25.
12
actually.
units on that, piece of land, but you have, 5 acres of the uplands as part of the open space, plus you have all the other land that's carved out of that, the wetlands and the other carve-outs.
Yep.
So that, so then you have properties that are clustered onto the, 5 acres. So they wouldn't necessarily have a 60,000 square foot lot because they're on a smaller piece of land.
But the equivalent in the size of the area would be equal to that. In other words, it doesn't increase the density on the land more than up to 1.2.
Right. So it increases density on one piece of the uplands.
Right.
You're not, you're not like doubling the density on that property, unless you get to the,
55 and
yeah,
older.
the 55 and older, which has a different up to multiplier on it. I believe it's about up to two units per.
2 units.
It is.
Or 2 units per net usable acre.
I'm sorry, Mr. Eddings?
I just got a couple questions. When I read this, is a
Do-
dwelling unit,
I'm sorry, Mr. Chair.
Yes.
Through you, could you use a microphone up here?
Oh.
So we can hear you? Is that
Or,
horrible?
is that all right?
Got to get up to the microphone.
So I guess the questions that I ask is when we talk about a dwelling unit, is that the main structure a dwelling unit, or is so if you have a building and it has 4 units in that, is that counted as 4 units or one? Because they go from dwelling units and they use another word in here that it's not. So how does that go? So if you had a piece of land and you had an acre and you're allowed 2 units, would that be one townhouse with 2 units? Or could you put 2 separate buildings in with 5 units each?
So if you're coming under, the bylaw, so you calculate your net usable area. And so if you're doing over 55, so you say you have what, 5 usable acres. So you say 5 times 2 is 10 units. And then those 10 units, so it depends, it could be in one building, it could be, up to 5. So if you have 10 units, so you could have 5 units in 2 buildings, because the 5 is the maximum. And then, or you can have, spread it out, so you have, 3, 3, 1, so the number of dwelling units would be 10, but then how you configure it within buildings, or if you have duplexes, you might have 5 duplex buildings, so you get up to that 10 number.
And then when you calculate the space, you indicated that, and I just read through this, so you indicate, from my reading, it says that the area that they subtract is any wetlands, water, or whatever that's located within that 65-foot buffer. If there is no wetlands or anything within that buffer, what is that land counted as? Does that go towards the buildable land, or does it count as
So if there's no wetlands,
within it, in the 65-foot buffer?
okay, well,
Because it says here,
It's-
the NULA acreage is established by subtracting all water bodies, wetlands, marshes, bogs, and this one says, and land within the 65-foot buffer, but I think the other one that I read indicates, doesn't say land.
I
thought
think it's
read
the
something.
65-foot wetland buffer.
Yeah,
right, so
All-
if there's wetlands plus the buffer.
so the
that would-
65-foot counts.
Yes.
So that would be, well, if there's wetlands, so if you have wetlands, then you have 65 feet from the wetlands where you can't do any development in. So that's subtracted. Now, let's just say you have, what if your parcel is all upland? So there won't be any subtraction of the.
Oh, no, you wouldn't have any buffer land. I'm just saying, this can't, you don't use in your calculations the amount of area that's in the 65-foot buffer.
And,
Right, so that wouldn't count as a.
Okay, no,
and
that's
we
what I
shouldn't
was-
be, honestly be considering anything within the 100-foot buffer zone without prior
Well,
approval.
the 100-foot comes into play, where do I see that?
They don't talk about the 100-foot buffer.
Right, well, that should have prior approval from Concom before it even gets to us.
I mean, some of the setbacks that, from the townhouse, some of the setbacks also went from 60 feet or 40 feet to 25 in the open space or the new one. So they go from open space requirements. One or more open spaces areas shall be shown on the development plan. Such areas shall include the following: the 65-foot buffers.
So if I may, Mr. Chair?
Please.
Duke, is your question, what if the parcel doesn't contain any wetlands?
No,
Then-
I'm just trying to get the setback, like,
Oh,
on some of these, they talk about small areas of land within the town. And I just wonder what the maximum build-out would be on those smaller parcels. I mean, when we're talking about a 20-acre parcel, it's one thing, but what's the density on smaller parcels?
It's 1.25 at maximum for standard, and it's 2.0 maximum for 55 and older. So if you could build 8 houses on that 10 acres, if you're going to put in 55 and older, the bylaws allow double that, up to double that. And if it's standard, it allows up to 1.25. Up to, but not necessarily required. Yes, Ms. Mello? Oh, I thought you were waving at me.
I just have one more.
Oh, wait a second. Jen?
All right.
Ms. Bogart?
It's all good. Call me Jen. Call me crazy, but does no one else kind of have a problem with changing a bylaw because an applicant who would financially benefit from the change asked the town to, and then use language from that same applicant who would financially benefit from it? I mean, we got an email from the proponent basically saying, here's some language for the change that we think would be good. I don't see this having come up organically from the town, how it would benefit the town. So to me, it's unsettling that we would be changing a bylaw with a proposed applicant's language to suit their needs. I'm just totally irked by
To be
it.
fair, Ms. Bogart,
Yeah.
I think Jim and I, and Bruce and I have discussed it on different occasions, and the fact that there's certain languages in the original bylaw that conflict with certain other languages in our bylaw in relation to townhouses, and we wanted to clarify it. But I definitely see your point, and I do take issue with some of the changes in here, and that's why I think we should go over them. And I think it would be best if we went over them one at a time from page 1 at the top, where the changes begin, and work our way down.
Well, yeah, I mean, if there are discrepancies, then let's look at those. That seems more in tune for what's best for the town.
Yes, no, I agree.
But the information given is just irky. So I'd love to have that conversation, and maybe you guys would lead it, but this is unsettling to me.
Well, we could start with the first proposed change on the first page, where the words "to facilitate construction" are added in.
Yeah.
And personally, I think we should open that for discussion. Yes, please, Fran.
Before we have a discussion about this particular bylaw, thank you, I'd like to bring up the fact that the committee had a set of bylaws when we formed the committee that we were going to look through. And this bylaw was not part of that set of bylaws. And I really feel that we've started on several bylaws, but haven't come to a consensus on any of them.
Right.
Yeah.
So instead of throwing more bylaws on top of what we started, I think it would be important to at least begin working on what the committee was formed for.
We do still have homework from our last session, yes.
Yeah, and I mean, the TDR was a big discussion the first couple of meetings, and we were gonna receive more information back
We
on
are
that.
planning on, we are expected to receive the maps on the 20th, and we're holding a meeting specifically for the TDR bylaws to discuss the maps on the 25th, if I'm remembering correctly off the top of my head. Specifically, and it's going to be a big meeting, so it's probably going to be the only thing on that meeting.
And as a member of this committee, I'm just feeling very pressured to make important decisions for the town without a lot of background as to why this is coming here. Here's another thing we want you guys, I received this on Friday, and our meeting is today, and, you know, without any background, without any information as to why this has been put into the mix. That's all.
Thank you.
Mr. Chair,
Yes.
if I may, I kind of agree with Mrs. Bogart and Ms. Mello there. I think that in reading what the proponent sent to us, I went back and looked at our townhouse development bylaw, and actually, reading theirs made me see, I know that there are things wrong with our own townhouse development bylaw, things that have been left out.
Right.
So my feeling is that maybe that's one of the ones we should work on before we start some brand-new.
I think this is to replace the townhouse bylaws
No, it would be in addition to
Oh.
it, but it could replace it.
in addition to it.
Right, but you could replace it, because so the townhouse bylaw only allows multifamily on it,
Mm-hmm.
and you can't do single family.
Right, but it limits it to 25% of the property, too,
So,
or 25% of existing housing in the town.
Yeah,
yes, right.
it does.
Or existing townhouses in the town.
No, I think it says that existing
Overall,
housing units,
throughout
it
the-
can only be
if there's-
25% that's
yeah, if
townhouse,
there's
which I don't
1,200.
understand that at all, but.
Well, if there's 2,000 units in town, and of course, we're building all the time, then the maximum density of townhouses allowed in the town of Carver is up to 25% of the,
No, I understand that.
Yeah,
I don't
okay.
understand why. It's a different discussion. That's
Yes.
okay.
Get a hand up in the corner.
yes, Mr. Tripp.
See if I go to the speaker, because I think I can enlighten everyone to the history.
Can you use a microphone so
Yeah.
that the people at home can hear?
Really quick, I just want to, the number of townhouse units in a proposed townhouse development, when combined with the number of all existing and previously permitted townhouse units in Carver, shall not exceed 25% of the total number of existing dwelling units in the town as of the date of the townhouse development special permit application. That's section 3944 of the bylaw.
Yeah, my question was, why did they limit it to 25%? But that's a
Yeah.
different discussion.
Right, that's history, so I don't know what
Well, it can be changed, too. I mean,
Right, right.
mhm.
Hello, for the record, my name's Lauren Tripp. I'm actually, one of the people that helped work on this with Jim.
I can't hear you, Lauren. I'm sorry.
I'm one of the people that worked on this draft that you have in front of you. And really what is reflective of is exactly what the board over the past several years has been approving in the town of Carver. The issue is that the bylaw itself, based on what's being approved, there are conflicts in it that create gray areas based on what's allowable and what isn't. And the chairman actually brought up that discussion in regards to conflicts. The first is the definition. If you look at the back of your bylaw, the definition talks about that a townhouse development must be 2 units or more, but not less than 5. That means all units approved in the town, if you just went by the definition of that, would be 3 units per building to 5 units per building. The fact of the matter is that the town's been approving projects under the townhouse development with 1 units, 2 units, 3 units and above over the past few years, because at the discretion of the board, they felt that that was in the best interest of the town. They approved our project not once, but twice. First for the original special permit, and then second for the amendment to it, where they encouraged us to remove the 25% duplexes and put them as single-family, because they felt the value to the town would be better to get rid of the duplexes and go single-family and would generate more tax revenue for the town. So we removed that, and the board last year approved making all the units in our project single units. What we've done is basically adjusted that to make it now consistent with what the town's approved. Town has also approved duplexes, 100% duplexes on townhouse developments. If you look in the section where it says cannot be more than 25%, the reason they did that is because they felt that it was in the best interest of the town to approve that project. So really what this represents, and it's not uncommon with many bylaws, because you have different additions and changes and market changes over the course of decades, that the bylaws need to go through what's called housekeeping, to straighten them out, to make them more consistent, to be what's being approved, what the market demands are of the times that you now find yourselves in, and make those adjustments. This basically is just consistent with everything that's been approved in the town, and takes away the questions and the conflicts that are created because when the definition was put in, was a certain time. When they put in that 25% of the units can only be duplexes, that was a certain time. But that addition conflicted with the definition. They weren't done at the same time. So when you look at a bylaw, it's like an onion. There's different levels and times in when different things were put into place. What happens is you finally come to a point, which where we're at right now, that it gridlocks the board because there's so many conflicts in it. They're like, we can't move forward unless we straighten this out. So really what we're doing here is housekeeping. We're straightening it out, making it consistent with what the board's approved. We have an actual physical project that's under construction. We want to come in and do the TDRs and all that, but this has to be addressed. This is actually a sister bylaw to the TDR bylaw. So when you look at this and you look at the setbacks that you brought up before, and then if you go to your TDR bylaw, when you look at a receiving area, now the setbacks in the townhouse development match what you have for a receiving area in the TDR bylaw, because they didn't match. So if I want to do a townhouse-style development in a receiving area, your setbacks didn't match. What this does, it corrects it, and now makes it consistent with your TDR bylaw for the setbacks of 40 feet and 25 feet. So when you look at this, really, nothing's really changed except put in place what's already approved and on the ground under construction has been built in the town of Carver over the past decade. So, you know, it's nothing to fear that we're trying to sneak something in or do something for our financial benefit. What this does is codifies what the board has actually voted for in developments that are already built and under construction or to be built. So that's really what it is. It's not some kind of end game where we're trying to sneak around the public process.
Thank you.
In fact, it's us that started this process because of the TDR bylaw.
Thank you. All right. Any more questions? Anybody want to discuss something, or do I hear a motion to?
One quick.
Yes.
I have some,
It's just because of what was brought up, period. And I'm not even for, against, I don't even know yet. This thing comes to me on Friday, like I said, or whatever, and come and look at it. But when I look at this board, and thank God Jen said something, because I get this thing, right? And we're talking about TDR and where we want density in this town. And where we want to place it, and how we want to restrict it, or not restrict it, or where we're looking for it. And the next thing I know, we're jumping to solar arrays. And then the next thing I know, I miss one meeting and I come and I get this thing that tells me we want to raise density. And this thing also says that, oh, we're going to give the developer, he only has to do 10% of the building has to go to lower income, but over for these projects. I mean, if we give 10% to every developer to come in here, we're never going to catch up, because the amount of units increases. The 10% just breaks even, and
I
we
agree.
never get
Yes,
caught up.
and that's true, but.
So, but
we
these
can't-
have to be discussed, Cornelia. It's not
Yeah.
something that we sit here at a
No,
meeting.
no, I agree with you completely, but the 10% is what's on the books right now, and that's something that we would have to sit down and discuss that.
Well, that's what I'm saying, but I'm saying I think there's a lot of discussions to be able to come here, get this bylaw thrown in us. I mean, they, based on their emails, have been talking about this for a month and a half. And you send us out this. I didn't even know that there was a group that was discussing this to come forward with us. I thought we were doing TDR or some of the things that are already on there. I don't know when they were looking for a vote for this or anything else, but I mean, to take a vote or anything
That's all
today
right.
would seem.
Do you feel we need more time to research and before we address this issue?
Absolutely, and nothing against it, but I don't even know when you talk about a building envelope. I mean, maybe planning board guys in their normal conversations know what a planning envelope is. I don't know that from a hole in the wall. I mean, I would like to see what that is. I mean, like I said, I'm trying to write there, take notes, be a good member on a board to come in there with good discussion points. But when you get something and it just seems like we're trying to push this through the back door.
Yeah, I don't want that. I want an open and
I
clear
mean,
discussion on
ultimately, we're
everything.
just gonna make a recommendation to the planning board, they can do whatever they want with it. So I get that. So I don't know when our answers need to be to that board in order for them to vote. I don't know if this is something separate that's not going to town meeting or going to town meeting, but I would like to have a little bit of discussion with my fellow committee members,
Yeah.
find out what their points of
That's-
view,
yeah.
then go back and think and do some research and come back and maybe, Tom can't address the question, but maybe I found something, or maybe you found something, or maybe somebody's got another point. I just think it's too quick. That's all.
Oh, fair enough. Yes, please.
So I have a number of things, and one of them is I didn't really understand the answer to the question, what is a unit? So I'm going to try to ask the question differently. Is a unit a building, or is it each subsection of a building, say it contains 3 townhouses? Are each of those inside the one structure, are they considered units?
So it's a housing unit, so,
Well, then I think it should say housing unit,
okay, so,
because it's really not clear, I think.
so, right, so have a building, and the building could have 1, 2, 3, or 4 housing units within that building.
Okay, because I remember when this first went in, that there was a lot of confusion. This was years ago. So I think that really needs to be spelled out in here. And that kind of goes to my point about working on the original townhouse development, because it
Yes?
really needs some work. So can I go on?
Please.
Okay, so under section 3941, towards the bottom where it says approved by the board, a housing organization approved by the board with resale restrictions to assure continued affordability in perpetuity. This is talking about the
Affordable housing.
the affordable housing. What that really needs to say is with resale affordability restrictions recorded at the Plymouth County Registry of Deeds. Because that's the only thing that will ensure it in perpetuity. It can't just be written in some agreement with some organization. This happened to us, the very first, what was considered an affordable unit in Carver was built on High Street by Habitat for Humanity. And somewhere along the way, that got lost. And so when the people sold it, it was sold as a market value. And it just sort of defeated the whole purpose of having done that. So that needs to be changed in the townhouse bylaw. And in this one, if we adopt it, the next one is same subsection 3941. The very last sentence of that, where it says dwelling units reserved for occupancy by persons or families of low to moderate income, et cetera, says shall not be segregated from market rate or larger dwelling units in this, whatever we're going to call the district. And I think it's really important to add the following. And they shall be required to have the same exterior as market value units so as to render them indistinguishable from market value units, and shall have the same heating and cooling systems as their market value counterparts. Now, I know it's a paraphrase of what's already in some of our bylaws where it talks about the affordable units. They have to look the same on the outside. It's not saying the developer has to put a marble countertop in the affordable units, but they have to have the same heating and cooling, and you have to have them look the same on the outside so no one will know which one's the affordable unit. I mean, that's kind of the whole point. And I can send these comments out so you don't have to remember everything I said. Under section 3950, open space requirements, the paragraph that starts, such open space shall exclude required building envelopes and buffers. I believe it should read, building envelope exclude required building envelopes, comma, buffers, and comma, power line / utility easements.
Agreed. Yeah.
Because it just, my opinion, I'd love to hear what the rest of the group thinks, but I don't believe power lines really necessarily should count as open space in the true sense of the word.
Well, it's unbuildable land, correct?
Well, you can't put a structure on it.
Right,
Right.
exactly. But then it
You
shouldn't
can
be
put septics in it,
And it
though.
shouldn't be considered in the net usable land.
Well, it shouldn't, right, and it shouldn't be considered part of the more, sensitive siting and, preserving the beauty of the town. And power lines, really aren't that kind of open space, I guess
definitely
is.
see your point.
Yep. So under 3953, where it says consolidated and unfragmented mass, the next phrase, as reasonably interpreted by the planning board, I don't think an unfragmented piece of land is open to interpretation. It's either fragmented or it's not. I mean, it does say roadways can cross over land in certain cases, but I think that kind of goes to Jen's point from a couple meetings ago. Well, who's going to define, what's unfragmented? It either is or it isn't, I guess, is my issue there. Under 3955,
Yes,
Are you suggesting to remove the unfragmented?
no, I'm suggesting to remove the last phrase, as reasonably interpreted by the planning board.
so the point you're trying to get is if somebody's got 10 acres of land and there's spots of uplands, they shouldn't be considered in the net usable land area?
No, this is talking about required open space.
Oh, yeah, okay.
At least half
Oh,
of the
yeah.
required upland open space shall be in a consolidated and unfragmented mass. So you would look at the property and you would take that unfragmented mass, and that goes out of the equation. That's not part of the net usable land. The little pockets could be net usable land.
Right.
But this is saying, no, you have to keep the open space land unfragmented. Does that make sense?
It does make sense.
Excuse me?
Needs to be a clarification of this.
Sorry, yes?
Just the unfragmented open space is part of the original lot. So the
Yes.
fragmented open space could be originally buildable land. When they create the open space, to ensure that it's quality open space, the reason why we put unfragmented in there is it guarantees that you don't get a patchwork of separated,
Correct.
non-connective open space to create quality open space.
Correct.
It's
Right.
not a matter of whether it's counted in the developable area it is.
Right, that was
No,
the
I-
point she was making, yeah.
I like the insertion of unfragmented, don't get me wrong, I think that's good. I just don't think anyone has the discretion to decide what's unfragmented. It's either together or it's not,
Right. I tend to agree with you,
Yeah.
yes.
So under 3955, at the very end of that little section, it shall be maintained in a manner that will ensure its suitability for its intended purposes. This is the proposed open space. They're suggesting it be conveyed to the town or its conservation commission. First of all, it says, shall be subject to a recorded restriction. Once again, we need to spell out what kind of restriction. It's a conservation restriction. And since the town can't hold its own conservation restriction, I would recommend adding at the end of that sentence, where it says for its intended purposes, said conservation restriction to be held by a nonprofit conservation organization, such as Wildlands Trust, Mass Audubon, or similar organization, and recorded at the Plymouth County Registry of Deeds. Because those things just need to be made very clear. And I think that's all I have for now. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Anybody else have any comments or want to discuss or make a motion on anything that was brought up by Ms. Hewings?
Yeah. I guess I would love for our next meeting to get a new proposed copy of the townhouse bylaw with the changes that Sarah just mentioned, because I feel like that is valuable, starting with the townhouse bylaw. Let's look at it. She suggested changes. Let's look at what it would look like with her changes. And then next time, we look at it and we dive in again. So I would love to get a copy of a bylaw with her proposed changes for next time to have a conversation about.
I'm happy to do that.
Good, because I didn't get that all in my notes.
Why not? Just
She
kidding.
suggested change, she suggested change.
I can do that if Mr. Chair, if that's what you'd like.
I would, and I think you should consider that in 3940, where it says bogs and land within a 65-foot wetland buffer should be increased to 100 feet with, unless it's approved by the Conservation Commission.
Okay. In it beforehand, yeah. No problem.
Connie?
Yes, please.
Chair? I have a couple of things. First, going back to the affordable, 3941, we've got 10% in here. We all agree that 10% of affordable is not moving us ahead.
Yes.
So I guess, the committee needs to decide what that number should be. And then the other question that I had, as we move forward with the changes that would increase density, I guess my question to either Mr. Walsh or Mr. Mackey would be, if you have 1.25 increased density on a town or a, what are you calling this?
This is the neighborhood pocket development.
Okay, so if you start with a bylaw that gives you 1.25 increased density for regular units and 2 times increased density for over 55 units, what happens to that density if we then put a TDR on top of it?
It's a good question.
Yes, the counting of the TDRs is very, very important, especially considering we're not a large city that has access to public water and sanitation. That will
Yeah.
certainly have to come up in our meetings, yes. I believe the 25th. So are you suggesting that increased density equals increased percentage in affordable housing?
No, no, first off, I think the 10% is not high enough. And then my question again is, we increase density via this bylaw, and then we adopt a TDR bylaw where receiving areas also get increased density. How does that multiply out?
Right. If we change it in one, the 10% requirement, we're gonna have to change it across the board through all of them, because otherwise it won't make any of the conservation subdivisions or open space planning worthwhile. Then it's just easier to go with standard construction.
That's a good point.
So if you're gonna increase, which we're allowed to do by the state, we're allowed to make stricter requirements, but it would have to be across the board throughout all of them, but it can't be at such a point where it creates such a burden on the developer. It has to be kind of balanced out there.
But if you have a subdivision with 12 houses on it, and you've got a 10%, you need, I believe it's over 10, you have to give one,
Yep.
correct?
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
So if you have a subdivision with 15 houses on it, you get one back.
Is it rounded down, Jim, or is it rounded up?
I think it's rounded up.
It's rounded up to
I
2.
think it's rounded up, yeah.
Yeah.
That's a lot different, and they're 60,000 square feet. So, if you're building 15 houses, you've got how many acres? That's a lot different than taking a 5-acre parcel and putting 30 units on it.
Right, which is something we certainly want to avoid. I believe actually it says in, right, that the 1.2, up to 1.25 or 2%.
But if you're a TDR receiving parcel, you get the 1.25, plus you get the TDR uplift. That's a lot of density.
It is a lot of density, but it's not necessarily on that project. I do believe our bylaws require that the project density be within certain parameters. Off the top of my head, I can't think of what it is, though. But you can't take a 5-acre property and put 25 houses on it. That's,
Yeah, if I could say something, I mean, you're limited, I mean, we've done these things around town, looked at different properties, or different people have come to the planning board or to the planner, and asked about putting certain amount of units on a piece of property, but it all depends if you can meet the wall setback requirements, and you also have septic requirements too. So the more units that you put on a property, the bigger the septic system becomes. And then the bigger the septic system becomes, that takes up space where you could put wells. So a piece of property can only accept so many units. I don't know if there's any magical figure for that, but there's only so much density you can put on a property because of the well restrictions and the septic restrictions. So,
but I see your point that maybe we should have some sort of guideline that prohibits more than what would double what would normally be available to put on the property, or triple, something along those lines.
Yeah, if I may,
But I
Mr.
thought we had that in the bylaw. I didn't think our bylaw allowed
No.
more than 200% density. I'll have to go back and look off the top of my head. Yes, please, Mr. Eddings.
Explain quickly, on the buffer areas between the bylaw for the townhouse developments and the one, I guess, that's proposed here, what is the justification of setting the setback from 40 feet for a buffer?
Oh, it's to match up with what's currently listed in the TDR bylaws, but what's the standard setback for a residential?
I'm just going what they,
Yeah.
what here, they took it and scratched it out.
Yeah, it was to match it up with what
I think
the
it's in the
TDR bylaws
townhouse
said.
bylaw. I think they're matching it up with the townhouse bylaw.
Oh,
I could be wrong.
Page
Um,
22, page 22 TDR bylaw.
Oh, it is TDR, okay.
Ms. Bogart?
Is this gonna be, this is just gonna be a bylaw on the books and not necessarily a TDR development, right? Isn't that what the Francis
This is to be a
talking about?
bylaw on the books, but I think it's to work in conjunction.
But somebody could not use the TDR and use the,
I don't think it's one or the other. You can use
Yeah,
both.
Use either one.
Yeah.
If I'm not mistaken, it's a revision to the existing,
TDR as a receiving area.
it's a revision to the existing townhouse bylaw that already exists.
Well, Jim says this is be additional to the existing townhouse bylaw.
Or it can be, so the group can decide.
Or we could decide that this, yeah,
Existing townhouse bylaw, or do you want to have a second section?
right.
But.
What we're looking
at
at,
Right now, this would allow single family, so that currently the townhouse bylaw allows 3 to 5 units and then 25% duplexes, whereas, and no single family. So if you have this one allows single family, duplex, three family up to 5 units.
But we wouldn't want a whole single-family setup. I mean, we want diversity. That's what we're trying to get after, is a diversity of housing.
So you could limit the percentage of single families, maybe?
Yes, I would certainly think about limiting that to no more than 25% of the proposed project.
And so if I may, Mr. Chair, just going back to what Fran said, I think we probably should raise the percentage of affordable to 25, or 20 or 25. But I agree with you, Connie, that should apply to all of them, because otherwise, there's no
Right, and I would agree with you there, but I think that creates that percentage would be an overwhelming burden on the developer. I think something more like 15% would be
Okay, that's what I really wanted you
more,
to say.
because affordable housing costs the developer,
Oh, I
not only,
understand.
he's,
A point of clarification, your bylaw already allows up to 15% affordable housing. If you look at, if they use full density, the base density of the development, they're required to provide 15%. In fact, on our project, we are providing 15% if we hit that max density. We're now required to do 10%. So it's already in your bylaw, you just have to go through it. It's complicated, that's why
But yes,
Trying to clean it all up.
I do see the point that 10% isn't getting us anywhere, and some of the older developments, affordable housing, have come off the market as affordable housing, as originally they weren't put in perpetuity, now that they should be. Mr. Eddings?
Adam, you wanna go, cause your hand was up?
No, go ahead.
I'm sorry,
You can
Adam,
go
I
ahead.
didn't see
No,
your
it's fine.
hand.
You can go
So
ahead.
I'm not trying to say, my concern with this buffer zone is not increasing density, like 15 feet's not gonna increase density. What I'm fearful is if you take a project that could be considered like Pine Street, where those neighbors all flooded in here and said, now we're looking at a development in our backyard. You're going from that building being 50 feet to now being 15 feet. And that, I guess, is really my concern, is,
Yeah.
and I don't, if it's my yard, that 15 feet would mean something, compared to the 40 feet. I would want as much space as I possibly can. I just think
Right.
that's the consideration that
What's
needs to
the,
be discussed.
what's the current numbers now? Is it 30 feet?
It says, all site plans shall locate a building envelope radius of 40 feet, of
No,
40
I-
feet or over
I
30
mean, for a
feet.
standard residential house.
Oh, okay.
If you were to build a new house, because,
Residential is 50, frontage, and 35.
150
side setback.
30
frontage.
side.
No, 50 foot from the front.
Oh, 50 from,
50,
oh,
150
street.
on the street, 50 from the
okay, 50
street,
from the street.
back from the-
50
and
back.
And what
and
from the
30
rear property line?
30 side setback.
And do we have a rear setback?
Yes, there is. I don't remember it off the top of my head, but
Rear setback's 50 as well.
50 as well.
Then
Very
it
good.
should be matching across the board. I agree.
Those values are cut in half for a conservation subdivision.
Correct. Yeah, and there's a good reason for that.
And we're not seeing, three-family dwellings wedged in on little tiny building envelopes in those subdivisions either.
Right.
It's not,
That's true, that's true.
And-
it's an option, they could, because those setbacks are so reduced, but you're not seeing them putting houses 15 feet off the property lines.
Right, I would, yeah, in a city, that's one thing, but I don't think that 15 feet would be appropriate at all.
Clarification for you one more time. I'm sorry, but I just.
That's
wanna-
okay.
You guys going off in a bad direction.
Right?
A standard approved lot has a 0 setback for a no-cut buffer. It allows them to cut all the way up to their property line. A no-cut buffer, which is what's being discussed in this bylaw, allows for a remaining no-cut vegetated buffer. If the
Excellent.
buffer doesn't exist vegetated, the developer would be required to install a vegetated buffer.
Like we're
That's
looking
a
off,
big
of-
difference.
like
But
we're
that's
looking at
the
off of High
15
Street,
feet.
correct?
That's if it's 15 feet.
It's
but
not
why
15
couldn't
feet, it's
it be-
25 feet. It'd be a minimum of 25 feet, there might be a.
And that's the no-cut zone.
Yeah, the 25 feet, but I mean, why couldn't that vegetated state be kept at 30 feet or 45, like 40 feet like it's supposed to be when it's along neighboring property or
Yeah.
whatever? I
That's
mean,
typically negotiated during the process, because you can
But
actually, the
negotiating,
neighbor can
that
ask for
puts it in the
fencing.
developer's hands. I understand why you're here. I clearly understand why you're here. I'm just simply advocating for homeowners in the town I live in. Not that I do business in, I do both. I'm just saying, those people on Pine Street marched in here, had numerous meetings because they were concerned about a project. We're sitting here discussing a bylaw, this bylaw that talks about adjacent properties, maybe additional plantings, earth, but this is a buffer between these projects and homeowners that have existing properties on here. And why are we lessening that to the owners of this for development purposes? If you tell me that the scale goes towards we need more development, so who cares, and that's the way it wants to go, I just simply say that needs to be discussed.
Yes, I
It
agree.
needs to be weighed.
And it needs to be
able to
standardized.
be heard on it. That's all I'm saying.
And it needs to be standardized across the board.
But doesn't it say on that, it says for over 55 housing? So does this setback, reduced setback only pertain to over 55 housing?
That's what it sounds like.
It depends on how you look at it. If you look at your receiving area in the TDR bylaw, it would be single-family unrestricted development, because that's what you guys rate. These are created by you guys, these are not my bylaw setbacks. What this does is it takes the setback that's allowed for 55 in the 55 area development and makes it consistent with what you've already approved in the TDR bylaw, so your setbacks are now consistent. And you have to understand, if you're creating a receiving area to increase density, to remove density from the areas you don't want it, in reality, you're gonna need reduced setbacks, because you're not gonna be able to fit that density on there reasonably and make the project look right.
But-
So that's why you created the TDR bylaw, to reduce those setbacks, understanding that that's where you're gonna locate the density.
But like I,
Setbacks are not realistic at greater than 25 feet.
okay, but is this setback reduction just for over 55? Or is it for all is this,
It would
go
be
for all the
any
building?
Development that takes advantage of, what this is a cluster bylaw. It's a cluster bylaw, is what it is.
Okay, so it doesn't necessarily have to be over 55
Well,
then?
it says over 55 here.
That's what it does, yeah, it does.
Just as an example, all the open space that we created on our project was between the existing neighborhood and our development, which created a 400-foot setback between houses instead of a 0 setback where you could cut right up to their property line. That's the benefit of this bylaw. It allows you to congregate the development in the least offensive way to integrate itself into the existing neighborhood and use the open space as a buffer between that neighborhood and the development.
It's a
That's why we had the
screen
entire
buffer.
neighborhood of Wade Street come and supported the project originally, because we went from 19 units to 54 units, but we created a 400-foot open space buffer between us and them. And they actually liked it better than the 19-unit development. As you recall, Mr. Bennett, you were there.
How close is the setback, sorry, Jen?
It's all good.
How close is the setback on the one in Main Street across from the Mexican restaurant, across the street where they put in, I don't know, at least 5 or 6 units up against that white house? From the back of that house to there, what was the distance of that area?
Well, it should have been the property line, but I wouldn't think it's
So
40
the
feet.
setback, I don't know, whatever was required for
I
that
just wondered,
zoning
just
district,
to get a
yeah.
visual of what.
It's probably, what, 30 feet, yeah. Yeah, you'd have to look, I don't
So
remember.
those would be 15 feet closer to that house if it wasn't for the restriction of 30 feet, correct?
I don't think this, see, I don't think this changes the positioning of the house. This is about the natural vegetation that must remain in place in order to screen any projects from the neighbors. I don't believe this is, unless I'm mistaken, this is allowing the house to get any closer. It's just allowing somebody to have maybe 15 more feet of backyard as opposed to,
And the way I read it, Cornelius, it says,
No,
all
that-
dwellings and structures shall be located a minimum and may be reduced to the minimum of 25 feet. So I don't know. I mean, if there's another code that
okay.
override this one.
No,
Yeah.
you're right.
I'm just simply
That's
saying
right.
that.
And that would be
voice
the
is gotta be
structure.
heard from the other side. I mean, maybe I'm the Grinch, but I'm just simply pointing out that there's probably a population out there that eventually is gonna get one of these developments in their big backyard. It may not be where somebody's willing to give that land. We're not writing for somebody who's got a proven track record. We are writing for anybody who wants to come in this town and do business. So I can't just say, this guy's good, so we'll trust him and we'll put it in a bylaw. I
Right.
don't know where the next
No,
development's gonna
it's-
go.
it's-
One development I know that's on the horizon is over there. And I know that those neighbors who have been in this town for a long period of time aren't happy.
So if I may, Mr. Chair?
Please.
To Duke's point, Section 3961 talks about both the distance between structures, adjacent properties.
Yep.
And it talks about buffers.
Yes,
Natural
it
vegetation.
does.
So it
I-
is talking about both.
I'm seeing that there now.
I
So,
mean, at least that's what's in the original one.
That's also the 100-foot buffer zone that people were asking about earlier, that's what that reference is. Where you'd be 100 feet from adjacent surface waters or wetlands.
Yeah, so it's, yeah, so you're right, so it's talking about three things. Yep.
Mr. Chair,
Yes, please, Jen. Ms. Bo.
it's all good. If we're talking about changing the 60 to 40 and the 40 to 25, so two bylaws match, instead of reducing this bylaw, why don't we increase the other one? Change the other one from the 25 to 40 and the 40 to 60.
Yeah.
Why don't we talk about that instead of automatically just saying, let's reduce it?
Right, no,
If
I'm
we want
looking
them
for
to match,
conformity.
let's consider the other way.
I agree.
But I suspect, if I could, through you, Mr. Chair, I suspect part of the justification behind the reduction was because when you take one structure in one envelope and you split it into two separate structures that then have to be separated by a certain distance, you need to reduce those setbacks that are required so that you can fit the two structures in whatever spot you're talking about. You're not talking about one foundation or two units that are connected to each other. You now have setbacks with foundations, with septic systems, with everything else that have to be separate from each other. And you can't consistently fit two separate dwelling units, two single-family homes in the same envelope as a townhouse when you have those other setbacks. So it made sense to reduce the 60 to 40 and the 40 to 25.
But then
so that you'd
maybe
allow
we-
for that construction.
Maybe we shouldn't be allowing two individual homes if they can't fit on the lot.
Well, I think there's a difference between within the building envelope.
Correct.
And being adjacent to properties. And I mean, I guess, I don't know how that would be written, but I don't have the problem where people are coming in and buying in a neighborhood and those houses are close. My problem, when I look at that development over there, and I don't really have a problem with it, but my concern, I guess, would be to say not how close they are to one another, because they come in and look at them and buy on that, based on that. It's the property owners that have been and now have this wall in their backyard. And I understand they don't own the next lot, so they take that chance, but I just think that there's gotta be a conversation. I sit there and say, maybe we come up with a conclusion that 15 feet's okay, but I think it needs to be thrown out there that what that really looks like.
Maybe we should consider going with the TDR and not changing this, but allowing the planning board to reduce them if necessary, if they feel that it's appropriate to the betterment of the town, to reduce it to 40?
I'm just one player.
Right? No, I want to see a standardization here, for
I
sure.
would like to take the time when I sit there and I say, I get this, so we get this and be able to discuss it. I guess that's one of the things that I want to do, is take this to the streets and ask some people that can potentially get affected by this and what their thoughts are.
Oh,
I'm
sure.
not saying that they're the overall, but then, I mean, you gotta weigh that against the need for housing that is affordable, that's over 55 with the increase in population. I get that aspect too, so it's trying to find that level ground where to go, but I do think that people should be heard, at least anyways.
Right, and I don't think we can age restrict affordable housing, if I'm not mistaken. If it's 55 and over, it can't be affordable, so I think that's one of the challenges that we face here too. What we save in services for over 55 as opposed to meeting our requirement for affordable housing.
I don't know if that's true. Is that true, Jim? I mean, we can still do, I mean, if you have a 55 housing project, they have affordables, but if oh, yeah, that's right, then, how did that go?
Well, a certain percentage of them will have to be
Certain- yeah,
affordable.
They have to be affordable. Whether
It's like
they're
any
just
other.
restricted to the 55 or not,
I think, so when the Patriot Pines came back to us, they wanted to transfer 6 units over to Silver Street, which is allowed according to the inclusionary bylaw. I think the idea was, at the time, was that you couldn't restrict families from living in those 6 units, and you had an over 55 project.
There's been legal precedent now, because of where the state changed that 2 years ago, that if it's a 55 plus, because the entire project is 55 plus, that they can't, you can restrict single families, non-55 plus into it. Then there's a percentage of it that's allowed. I don't have it off the top of my head. My attorney, I think, has the documentation of it. But the likelihood of single families wanting to move into a 55 plus neighborhood is very limited. But if it's the restrictions on there and it's on the deed, even though the 10% is required, there's that precedent that allows that to happen. Now, if it was a larger project with multiple types of housing, any age, and you tried to restrict that to just 55, that would be a no-no. You can't discriminate or segregate a particular, but if the whole project is holistically one type of development, and it's 55 plus, you can. And that was,
Okay.
that's the way it's broken out recently. Of course, the law can change every year or two, but that's where it seems to be right now.
I apologize, I may have missed something here, this may be me. Section 3960 here that we're discussing with the buffering and whatnot, 4 different places I see them discussing the 55 plus that we're just talking about. Does this only apply to 55 plus, or does it apply to any kind of dwelling unit that they put in? And if it does apply to anything, shouldn't we change the verbiage? Or is it only 55?
He's exactly right. If you look at this, it's only the 55 that's allowed to go down to 25 feet, okay? As standard would go to 40. So if you look at it, it's a sliding rule from the 60 to 40, and from the 40 to 25 for the 55 plus. So the 55 plus has less of a setback because you allow for a higher density of 2 units per acre, net usable acre. It makes sense to have a reduced setback, whereas in a single family, you'd only have a 40-foot setback, okay? So because the density is, as Madam over here spoke earlier, of 1.25, your density increases for single family is 40% less than a 55% 55 plus development. So this really just kind of moves it on a sliding scale that is consistent with page 22 of the TDR bylaw. Does that, I think that clarifies it. So it is 40 feet for just a single family home of non-cut permanent buffer.
So maybe should we clarify the wording in 3961 and 3962, because I didn't get any of that from those.
When they say for over 55, 40, and then it changes to 25, then it's implied that the 60 is for non-55.
Right, or maybe reduced to a minimum of 25,
Correct.
40 feet for over
And
50.
it's always at the determination of the planning board whether those buffers are reduced at all. These are just guidelines, but that's the maximum that could be allowed even through the use of the planning board. Planning board might determine based on vegetation and topography that it's 50 feet, or 60 feet, or 75 feet, based on the actual design of the project. This sets the minimum standards. At the maximum reduced setback would be 25 feet, or 40 feet, for either the type of development.
So if I could just say, Mr.
Please,
Chair?
Mr. McKee.
Having gone through a few subdivisions with the planning board myself, we've had buffer areas along the perimeter between the neighbors and the older neighbors, and then the newer neighbors that are coming into the subdivision. And sometimes with even a 50 or 100-foot buffer, if the woods is sparse, it's a no-cut zone, so if the woods are sparse, then you can still see between the houses. So the good thing about this bylaw, even though you're decreasing the setback, is that, and which we've had to do for solar panels and we even do it on some of the subdivisions. They say here that you have to screen, and screening can be a fence, it can be trees and shrubs, it can be a combination of all those things. So although the setbacks are less, you may even have more screening than if you had 50 or 100 feet from the property line. So it's just something to think about.
Now, maybe you can clarify 3961 requires a 25 or 40-foot natural vegetative buffer? Is that the base of this? Buffer areas shall be retained in their natural vegetative state to the maximum extent feasible where the 60 40-foot buffer or 25 40-foot buffer for over 55 of natural vegetation is not adequate. So to screen the development from adjacent property. So if I'm not mistaken, 3961 is the requirements for a natural vegetative buffer.
Well, if I may, Mr. Chair, as we mentioned earlier, 3961, we might want to split into 3 parts if we're even going to look at this bylaw, or we could do it in the townhouse bylaw, because it's talking about the minimum number of feet between structures, and then it's talking about for a minimum number of feet to wetlands, and then it's talking about the minimum number of feet for vegetative buffer.
Well, I think what it says is the structures can be 40 feet from the property line, but that 40 feet has to be a natural vegetative buffer between the side property. So
Yep.
the back of their house would be, if they put it 40 feet, it would be on the line. They'd have trees growing through their back windows.
Right.
So just,
And yes, the 3962, the building envelope has to be 40 or 30 feet, but it should probably be, if we think about reducing it from 60 to 40, it should be a 45-foot.
Well, I'd like to point out to the committee that this bylaw started at 60 feet. Our regular single residential bylaw is 50 feet. So this bylaw was actually giving adjacent property owners a little bit more than a regular single-family home. And I just, to reduce that from 60 to 40, which is less than a single-family home, to me, I think is burdensome to the current property owners.
Yeah.
Minimum, it should match our single-family home.
So maybe we should standardize it with what the existing law says of 50 feet?
I don't think it should be any shorter than that.
But how much vegetative and as opposed to where the structure can begin are the two different.
Right, and the vegetative and the buffer, to me, like Sarah said, is a different discussion. But lot line setback, especially where it is adjacent to single-family homes, should be the same as what you would normally get in a single-family neighborhood.
It's currently only 40 feet, though. According to this bylaw, the building setback from each other, from the two buildings, the two structures, is 40 feet, and it's 30 feet and over 55 with the building envelope.
I thought it was 60. Why do they have 60?
That's the buffer area, but there's two different things. The building envelope radius of 40 feet or 30 feet for an over 55 housing from the outside edge of a building or group of buildings. So the buildings have to be 40 feet apart.
And by the way, that's within the development, it is not applying to adjacent properties.
Yeah.
So
That's
in
the
the
building
development, and the
envelope,
30 feet is
correct?
really set by the fire department, so that they can get apparatus to it. So in regards to, just so, here's a good example, because I think this will clarify for you. If you imagine that we have a 40-foot non-vegetated setback, okay? And then you have a house right at the edge of that 40 feet. To the residential house, you're right, if it's a single-family home, there's an additional 50 feet to that building. So now your setback is 90 feet from building to building. You see how that works?
Well, there's no setbacks from the vegetative state other than what's outlined in,
I'm just saying, if there was a property line, okay, and you had an existing single-family home with a legal setback of 50 feet because there's a grid subdivision from that property line, and now you put a smart growth development next door to it, which mandates 25 to 40-foot vegetative setback before you can even build a structure or a house, you now have 90 feet between those buildings. So in effect, it creates a greater setback than would otherwise be allowed. And also,
Well, that's not true.
where the single family,
because
Right.
just let me finish. I respect your question because it's a great question to ask. That single family home can clear its property line and put their fence 1 inch off the property line, whereas the development over here is restricted. They cannot enter that no cut buffer.
But-
They actually provide more protection from encroachment.
To Ms. Mello's point, she's right, it is a reduced setback, because it was 50 and 50, it'd be 100 feet, and we're
Right.
doing a different
And
proposition.
that's what I was going to point
Now,
out.
Well, I agree with you, I agree with you on that. But the point is that if you're trying to create smart growth and cluster development, the only way to fit it, as this gentleman talked about earlier, if you're gonna cluster more houses on less land and preserve open space, the give up is that you reduce those setbacks so it works.
But you shouldn't reduce them for the people that are currently living there. I agree with putting more on less. I'm not saying that, but what I am saying is the burden should be on a developer to come into a neighborhood and do what is right for the neighborhood.
Absolutely.
Not the neighborhood adjusting
Yeah.
to what is profitable for a developer. And if a single person walked into this town and wanted to build one house for themselves, they would have a 50-foot setback. And to me, that is what a developer needs, a 50-foot setback, because in this town, that's what we felt was reasonable for our citizens.
okay, yep, I'm seeing it. Right, and there has to be some difference between where the required vegetative buffer of 40 feet and the house begins there. So even if we did reduce it to a 40-foot buffer, you're still looking at a minimum of 45 feet from the property line, because there has to be, you can't have trees growing up against the sides of people's houses. And it will allow for encroachment onto the buffer zone. All right. So, yes, please,
Can
Ed.
I ask, I don't want to go down another rabbit hole, but can I ask what the reasoning or justification is behind, just to sort of have a dialogue about the reasoning behind increasing that 10% to something above that 10%, so that we're sort of in a rush to get to an affordable housing number? What's the thought process behind that as something that makes it desirable to the point where we proactively want to do it?
To raise the required 10% affordable housing?
Right.
Well, because people come in and build houses on an individual basis, and then at that point, we fall behind even further on the state requirement, because the state requires 10% housing for the town. So our town should have, 10% of it should be affordable housing, and I think right now we're roughly 2.5%.
Yeah.
But it's not.
Mr. Chair,
we don't- we're not-
may I add something to what you just said?
Yeah.
So the reason it's important to raise it to 10% as soon as possible is that so we don't get 40Bs that are unfriendly coming
Right,
into our
so-
town.
But I
Because,
think we-
because as long as we stay below 10%, they can come into our town, and it's really hard to say no.
Well,
But we want affordable housing, just not unfriendly, forced down our throat kind of affordable housing.
That we don't want.
Right, and the basis of 40B housing is that if we don't have the 10%, they can go to the state and ask to be exempted from the local building laws.
Yep.
and Only be
And
required to
conservation
work
laws
for
and
the
planning board.
state laws.
Yep.
And I get that. I'm familiar with 40B and I understand how it works. I'm sort of trying to understand why there's this proactive initiative to build affordable housing as opposed to housing that developers want to build because the market dictates it, right? I mean, they're building houses in this town that cost what they cost because there's a market for it. And the more high-value homes there are in town, the more it decreases the tax burden on homes that are of lesser value than the homes they're building. So essentially, by adding affordable housing units proactively, you're increasing the tax burden on everybody whose home value is above that affordable home price.
So there's also a need in town, Mr. Chair, for affordable housing.
Oh, yes,
a
no, I mean,
desperate
it's
need.
incentivized by the state. The state wants us to have it, and that's the purpose behind it, is they want us to meet this, otherwise we face We're on the
We're
short end of
susceptible
the
to a
stick.
40B development, and I get that. I struggle with this idea of proactively saying, hey, let's dump the tax burden onto people.
Well, should we do it reactively? I mean, I don't think we should be reacting.
But it's
So,
smart growth. What I'm saying is, when you talk about 10% of a developer, they come in and put 60 units in your town, and six are affordable, and the other ones are going for $500,000, and you're meeting those services. So you either raise it, or you condition those other amounts of units so that, they put money towards the schools and everything else. They're not poor developers. They're not coming in here and not making money. Don't be fooled by that.
Well,
They're in here to
that's,
play the game and
that's-
make big bucks.
that's outside the scope of our discussion right now.
It's not. He asked a
Well-
question, and I'm not fighting with that. I'm simply explaining that if you get the 10% rule, we need affordable housing. That's exactly what we do. But if we have a person that comes in and puts 30 units in, 3 go affordable so that somebody can remain in this town, stay in this town, and 27 go to unaffordable, and then what do? So what happens in these complexes is the 1-bedroom corner lot that overlooks the dumpster becomes the affordable unit, and all the other units that have the great looks in the 3 bedrooms become the buyer ones. I don't really care, but if you're talking about controlling growth, then why don't we allow setbacks for houses and have more single-family houses? It's better than bringing in 60 new families or 27 new families on a small piece of land.
Yeah, I guess, to my larger point, part of the reason why I asked the question, and I think this dialogue is helpful, is because I think there's ways to accomplish what we're talking about accomplishing without putting a requirement in a bylaw like this where you have to have 15 or 20% affordable housing. You can do it by controlling the other language in your other bylaws and making things a little bit tighter and easier and more susceptible in the right areas in other ways, rather than taking what I think conceptually is a really good bylaw. I mean, ideally, you would love to have, I would think, a subdivision, it's not a subdivision, but a townhouse development like this with 40 single-family homes that are all over 55 homes. That's good development for a town like us. But when you're requiring those homes to all be, or, 20% of those homes to be affordable housing units, you're diminishing the value of those homes, which again, houses like this, like the development that's out behind the Shaws, or where the Shaws used to be in Plymouth near Sullivan Tire, that's a similar style development to this. You've got like 80 units on that lot that are all single-family lots. Those structures sold for like $600,000. They weren't cheap. Just because they're on top of each other didn't make them inexpensive. So when you force houses in a development like that to be affordable unit housing, what otherwise would be a tax base that has the ability to continue to support the town, you're then passing that tax burden on to homeowners whose home value is slightly above that affordable home. And it's, to me, it's not it's helping some people and hurting others. And I don't know that that's, what I'm proposing or suggesting is that a development like this is a good thing, not a bad thing, if it's done and done right. So by catering the language to do it and do it right, without forcing people to build affordable housing units, you can accomplish what you're trying to accomplish without the affordable housing.
I think one of the things, by promoting the 55 and older houses at quite a higher rate of density, because if it's not a 55 and older house, it's tax negative. It doesn't matter if it's a 4-bedroom or a 2-bedroom.
That's right.
And that's why we're giving so much flexibility to the over 55 houses. It's really what we'd like. We'd like to see more 1-bedrooms
I agree.
in the town.
I agree, and
to fit
I think we can
that.
accomplish this in here without requiring 20%
Like I said,
affordable
mine isn't
housing.
so much building them, it's where we put them. And that's why I started like to have the conversation started with the transfer of development rights, so that we can get the buildings to be where we want them, so that there's not congestion in the town and a well thought out plan. That's all I said. If you go up 495 and you look at starting in Middleborough, Raynham, all the way up there, if you look where they're building their apartments, their houses along here, it's along the corridor. They want those people to come into town, pull in their house, stay there, and then pull back out again. So there's gotta be they're not building them in the center of Raynham Center. They're not building them in these towns, in Middleborough Center. They're building them along the 495 thing so that people come in and out. It's not that you don't want them to come in, you just don't want rush hour going through town in the middle of the day and going out because the infrastructure's not built for that. If there's a way to fix that and correct that, then I'm all anywhere. I think smart development also incorporates where you put it. And that's why I like the transfer development, right? Because it gives the builder the opportunity to say, look, I'm all for taking it out of this area, just let me put it over there and give me a little incentive to do it. And I'm all about writing that check. You go.
Just briefly, because when you look at Carver holistically, and I've studied every aspect of Carver, one of the critical problems Carver has is 25% of your housing stock is mobile homes. Which the bad thing about that is they pay significantly less tax, which means 75% of the homeowners are subsidizing the 25% mobile homes. The other problem is that the state of Massachusetts, because they're affordable, because they have that tax credit, they should be considered affordable. The state of Massachusetts refuses to do that. So you're already at a huge deficit, more than most communities, where it's not just that you're back on your affordable housing that exists, but you've got a 25% of your stock isn't paying as much as a regular single-family home. So you have a greater burden to overcome. And that's why,
Well,
I think the burden is on the developer.
that is for the
To not only
selectmen.
provide 10% affordable housing, and we should.
That is for the
Because as
selectmen
we
and the
build
various
developers,
other towns to
we're
put
putting them
pressure,
behind the ball.
put pressure on the state for them to be considered as affordable. Once the wheels are off of them and they're put on a foundation, they're a house. And it's,
Been trying for 20 years.
yeah, I know, there's a trade industries that don't want to see that happen because they want to be able to come into town and put in 150 units on 5 or 10 acres of land. But, all right, back to the conversation of where we're at. And I understand your point, Adam. And that's something that I expect that we're going to vote on. That, hopefully, we'll have a more organized thing to look at next time with some of our suggestions put through. And one of my suggestions would be to remove the words "to facilitate construction" in our purpose, because that is diametrically opposed to everything else in the purpose of the bylaw.
I agree.
3910,
It's right at the beginning, Fran.
Yep.
Yeah.
And actually, to facilitate construction, there's existing language already down there that covers that, so I don't understand why that was put in.
I think it puts an unreasonable burden on the board.
Mr. Chair, do we know what time this is over? Because I have to leave.
Yes, actually, I was going to see about moving on to the next, I was planning on ending this before 7. And
I
what
have
is
to
it?
leave at 6:30.
Okay, yeah.
6:30, so.
You're excused, David.
I know everything in great hands.
We had some homework from our last one I'd like to address. We were talking about the sentence. Which sentence?
Topographical situations.
Topographical situations may require flexibility in either setback or screening decisions.
So are you willing to entertain ideas?
I am willing to entertain a motion in regards to this, sure.
Okay, so I think the phrase topographical,
Let me just
sorry,
clarify that it is,
yep,
in regards to this, we're talking about
section 38580,
3580,
large-scale ground-mounted solar photovoltaic installations.
and it's under section,
Page is that,
I don't know, I'm just looking at.
it's on
minutes.
page 2, but it looks like it's,
Page.
yes, section 3580, and it'd be section B, under section B, on page 2, third paragraph down. It's been italicized.
Oh, just so,
Now, at our,
one of the documents is printed out on the changes from 2019.
That's the original. Thank you.
Okay, so the one that says Article 22, that's the draft. that we can change to. And then also in your packet is the original bylaw from April 2019.
Okay.
So everyone's clear as to what they have in front of them.
Yep. Thank you, Jim. At our last meeting, we voted to recommend removal of that, and it can either stand, or somebody might have a better suggestion to replace that sentence.
I don't, oh, yeah, it was, okay. I have a suggestion.
Please?
So I think that we should remove the phrase topographical situations, and in its place add a phrase like the following: in the event that an LSGMSP project is proposed to be located at a lower elevation than the neighboring homes, because I think that's what the problem was. I think that's what,
In a lower or higher elevation?
well, I think the one that Mr. Mackey was talking about was on Snappet Road, right, where the project was way down here and the houses were all up here, and it was almost impossible to screen,
Oh, right.
because, yeah, you know, you can't put 200-foot screening up so the neighbors won't see it.
Yes.
That project's disappeared right now. so.
Well, there may come others. So I think we should talk about events where either the project is lower or higher, depending on, I don't have the rest of the language of that bylaw in front of me, I'm just looking at the minutes. But we can't just say topographical situations, I think we have to be very explicit. Is the topography at a lower elevation than the surrounding house lots? If that's what we're talking about, then I think that's what we should say. Oh, thank you.
Quick question on that. At one time, the originally solar bylaws, we had like a 1,000-foot distance and things like that. Does that still stand?
Oh, no. No, it's 200 feet,
I think it's 200
Okay.
feet, Chuck,
and it can be.
Okay.
except if they're like
So it's not
adjacent.
a visibility thing, it's a distance now.
I think, well, there's screening is required
Right.
too, but unless it's two agricultural bog owners, and they don't have to each have 200 feet from each other. I think that
Oh, right,
changed
I recall
also.
That changed
Yeah.
to
But
12
if
and
I'm
a half.
down low here and I'm a half mile away, do I have any say?
Right,
Only,
So-
only direct abutters.
Direct about it.
yeah. So it says topographical situations, 100% screening shall be attained from the greater of the abutting street grade or yard grade. Then it says topographical situations may require flexibility in either setback or screening decisions. So I think that it should say, in the event that the project is located in a topographically lower elevation, than the surrounding house lots. Then I don't know what you want to do with it. I mean, you still really can't fix the problem because the setbacks isn't going to change the view, and you can't screen high enough. So,
Well, didn't we address this in, that it's from, if you're standing in the yard, as opposed to, because if the street's 30 or 40 feet higher than the proposed, you get your house up here, 40 feet, and you got the abutment is still at the same level, or should be. I don't think we have any giant drop-offs really in the town of Carver.
Well, we've seen projects where the proposed projects that the solar facility was lower than the surrounding houses on a cranberry bog. So and we've run into some where so the houses could see the solar projects. One project's disappeared, but then in some cases, we were able to do, the solar company actually approached, I think, well, there's a couple of ways that can be remedied. If you can't screen the solar project, sometimes you can go on with their permission, you can put screening on the abutter's property.
right.
And we've done that. Fencing or tree, some sort of trees or something like that.
So maybe that's what it should say then, in the event that the LSGM SP project is at a lower topographical elevation than the surrounding homes, the applicant is required to, instead of just like if he wants to, is required to put screening on the abutter's property. If-
Well, that would be up to the abutter.
if the-
Yeah, right, it would be. yeah.
With the agreement of the abutter, oh, obviously, yeah.
Ms. Bogart?
I've been thinking a lot about this because I kind of spearheaded this last time. And it may not be popular, but I think that whole line about the topographical situation, flexibility should just be totally scrapped. Because I think, Fran, you were on that little TV last time and you had commented that there is still options or flexibility for a developer to try to get it done. The solar company, in the bylaws, it's written right now, the solar company can go and try to make deals with neighbors. Whether I think that's right or not is not applicable, but there is that option, and there's the option of going to the ZBA. If the project is not approved, they can go there too. I mean, it's a bylaw, so maybe a project doesn't fit a bylaw. Like, sometimes you have to be told no, ask my kids. So I think that whole thing should be scrapped. That's the law, you gotta screen it unless you can get the neighbors to sign off. I'm sorry. If you can't do that, try to appeal it. Because sometimes you gotta say no. And I think this is a case where it just has to be finite, because, I mean, Sarah's doing good, but like when you say the height difference, well, what if the project's 1 foot lower? Like, so I think it should just be scrapped,
That's a
made
good point.
finite, make the deal with the neighbor, go to the ZBA, what happens, happens.
Yeah. So maybe our vote from the last meeting should stand?
Please, Adam.
Yeah, I just wanted, I wasn't here for the last meeting, but I read over the minutes, I read Jen's comments. I couldn't agree more with what Jen's saying. And I say that, I'm familiar with the Snap It Road project and the site out there, I've been to that property, so I sort of know what that entails. When you think about what we want to accomplish as a committee, right? Smart, intelligent growth and putting things in the right places and putting things places where they make sense. I think there's, to Jen's point, there's a lot of land in this town that would be suitable for a project like this, a solar project like this, that's not visible to these homes, right? There's plenty of space off in the woods where these things can be built and constructed, as opposed to within viewing distance or line of sight of some of these subdivisions that we've built in town. The conservation subdivisions that have been done in town, they're all built on upland, most of them upland around bogs. They're beautiful, nice neighborhoods with valuable homes in them. To construct these installations within line of sight of these beautiful homes that were built and significantly impacting the overall value. I mean, some people bought these homes simply because they wanted a beautiful view of a cranberry bog. And I know they don't own it, but to me, it seems counterintuitive to have bog owners sell off the land and build these, $700,000 McMansions, and then 5 years later, build a solar panel on it that diminishes the value of that property that they no longer own. I don't think that's the path that we as a town, or the precedent that we as a town want to go down, where we start building things that devalue our valuable property. I understand the town doesn't own the land and people should have rights to do what they want to do on their land and things like that, but I think bylaws are meant to protect the general welfare of the town, and I think allowing installations like this to be built where topography to me is something that adds to value of homes, and by putting a solar installation out there that's going to completely destroy the value of these properties is not, in my opinion, in our best interest, and I couldn't agree with Jen more. I just wanted to offer that because I wasn't here for the last
Sure.
meeting, so.
No, appreciate it. Any other suggestions?
I would like to say that I concur. You told us to do homework, so I did homework, but I don't like it either.
Mr. Walsh?
Say, for example, the Snap It Road, sometimes is not a good place to put it. And the solar developer did not take the time out to go out and find a reasonable place to put the solar project. And his intent was to come in and, okay, let's get waivers from all the bylaw requirements.
Yep.
Under the Dover Act of the state statutes, you're required to approve my solar project. He brought that up numerous times. I had to restrain Jen from hitting.
What? That's not going in these minutes.
That's fake news.
But
All right, I will,
If I could just say,
yes, please.
I think all the solar projects that we've done so far in town, I mean, we've worked with the neighbors, we've worked with the abutters, we've worked with everyone. I think that the bylaws have worked well. And the particular one on Snappet Road, I don't think that would have ever gone through the planning board. It was, that field was just too visible, it was down low, well, it was just, I think it was just one property that objected, but it was a beautiful property that people had. And it would have never passed because, according to the bylaws, it could have never been screened properly to begin with. And then if they didn't, if the people that lived next to it that were objecting didn't want screening on their property, which you don't have to have, I mean, nobody can force you to put screening on your property. So there was no way that project was going to succeed, and it didn't.
Yeah, and my fear would be, Bruce, that with language like topographical situations may require flexibility in screening decisions, that with a planning board that was sensitive to the developer or the solar company's needs or desires or, whatever their whims were on that particular week, they could have approved that project and it could have moved forward, much to the demise of the individuals that own that property. So I think removing that altogether, topographical situations may require flexibility, and having just a strict 100% screening requirement accomplishes what we're talking about.
A strict 100% screening requirement, or to work with an agreement.
Which I also think is nice. It's nice
Yeah.
to give abutters that flexibility. If they agree and somebody wants to pay off your house and let them build a solar field, then let them do it.
Well, I will entertain a motion in regards to this.
Well, Mr. Chair, I think we voted on it at the
And
December 14th meeting.
yes, we did, I believe.
to
and we
take it
voted
out?
To take it out.
So do we need to just vote on that again?
I don't think we need to. No, unless we were
Yeah.
going to change it, because we
No.
voted to take it out and do our homework and come back.
Yeah, I think last time, we voted to take it out, and I said, let's try to think of something better and add it in next time.
Yep.
Yeah, that's right, yeah.
Yeah.
So,
But whether anything has to be added, I don't really think
No.
anything
No, I
has
don't
to be
think so
added, yeah.
either. No.
so on that note, I am going to move on to approval of minutes from 10/27/20, if that's all right with everybody.
Yes. Mr. Chair,
Yes.
I just have one minor edit on the minutes.
Mm-hmm.
So in the third paragraph, the second sentence, it said, Ms. Ewens asked for topographical situations to be defined and for examples. I actually, and this is very important to me, it may seem minor, but it should read, Ms. Ewens agreed with Mr. Meredith, but also asked.
Wait,
What
which,
date
you're on
is
the, I think we're 10.
December 14th?
Okay.
No, 10/27 is the one where,
Oh, I'm looking at the.
that's all right,
minutes.
we got both of them to get through, so.
Okay.
December 14 and
Let's take the 14th first then, December 14th, 2020. On the third, Ms.
Right, third-
Bogart
third
expressed
par-
concern.
Yeah, third paragraph, second sentence. It starts, Ms. Hewens asked. I would like it to, because what I did do actually was I agreed with what Mr. Meredith had said, but I also asked for topographical situations to be defined. So it's just adding that phrase, agreed with Mr. Meredith, but also. And then the next line, I know it's just a typo where it says of snap it, that's probably should read off snap it.
Oh, yeah, I see that.
I mean, that's just a typo.
excuse me, sir, can you go back? Ms. Hewens asked, or Ms. Hewens agreed with Mr. Meredith,
But also asked,
but also asked.
that's all, yep. Just want to be known that I agreed with Mr. Meredith.
And then
And then
down,
Mr. Walsh
oh,
described a prior proposal solar project. proposed solar project off Snap-it Road.
Yeah.
And I didn't see anything myself. Yes, please. We'll go with you first,
I
Adam.
apologize, I'm a little late.
Okay, no, I appreciate it. We really do. We really appreciate your time tonight. Thank you. Fran?
Just need the spelling of my name corrected.
I'm sorry?
Mellolo.
Oh,
My bad.
Where is
That's
it?
okay.
I was typing fast, my bad.
Milo.
I'm it's gonna be right
Oh.
this time now.
Mellolo?
Yeah, no W.
She got it right the first time.
Sorry.
And I have no corrections,
Is that it?
so I will entertain a motion.
I'll make a motion to approve the minutes of December 14th, 2020 as amended.
Okay, and Bruce Mackey, I'll second that.
Discussion? Seeing none, we'll do, should we do a roll call vote?
We have no one online, so we can.
Yeah, we'll just.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? Any abstentions?
One abstention.
Adam abstains.
Okay, so we got the minute.
All right, then we'll move on to the October 27th, 2020. Is there any corrections that anybody noticed? I just have one on the third page. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, about 10 lines from the bottom. Mr. Shea says, I believe it is 20 years early on, and it should be, I believe it was 20 years early on. It was 20 years, yeah. Anything else? Any other suggestions, recommendations? Seeing none, I will entertain a motion.
Make a motion to approve the minutes of 10/27/2020 with the one correction.
Second?
Second by Ms. Mello. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? Any abstentions? Excellent. Should we discuss our next meeting? Is going to be January 20th, I believe.
Suggesting the 20th, which is a Wednesday, because the Monday is a holiday.
And at that meeting, will we be able to expect some of the TDR materials to be disseminated?
So I believe we should have it around the 20th. I'll double check the circuit. And then, well, at least to have materials to give out. And then some of the additional changes I'll clean up for the solar bylaw, because I think that's key
Okay.
to help with the kind of location. Some of the changes will allow for solar projects to be on more remote parcels, if those changes were implemented, and then be less impactful
All right. We don't know the state of the world on January 20th, so it might be a Zoom meeting. So we'll see what's going on at that particular
God.
time before we decide.
Mm.
I know this is a little easier for some people to do it in person, and it's a lot more easier to understand. I want to thank everybody for their time tonight, and everybody paying attention at home for their time. And I can close, entertain a motion.
Make a motion for adjournment.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Any abstentions? Thank you very much.
Thank you.